The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 6. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 6, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to consumer protection, protecting price gouging during an abnormal market disruption, the second engrossment.
The member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stevenson, to explain your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we can be proud that most Minnesotans come together during a crisis. It could be as simple as getting a neighbor's car out of a snowbank, or it could be when a tornado destroys a community, or a flood or a fire leaves someone without a home. We help. We're generally good neighbors to one another, which is why I think most Minnesotans are rightly disgusted at the thought of someone making a windfall profit off of another person's tragedy. I think most people think it's wrong to squeeze extra money out of someone right at a time that they are most vulnerable. But right now, Minnesota's laws are not consistent with our values. Unlike almost every other state in the country, Minnesota does not have a law against price gouging during an emergency. And so our citizens are vulnerable to exploitation and have no recourse when it occurs. This bill changes that. It would make it illegal to price gouge during a disaster declared by the governor. It would fine people who do price gouge and allow for restitution for the victims. It also establishes clear expectations for what is permissible and impermissible pricing behavior during an emergency. Businesses will not be left wondering what they can and can't do. Some people watching this debate might be a little surprised to learn that Minnesota doesn't have a law against price gouging during an emergency. In particular, I'm sure that some are thinking back to the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic when the price of toilet paper and other essentials soared. In fact, this is an example of how Governor Walz used his executive authority under Chapter 12 to respond to the pandemic. Executive Order 2010 prohibited selling essential goods and services for unconscionably excessive prices. After implementation of Executive Order 2010, the Attorney General's office entered into 100 informal resolutions and 6 court-approved settlements stopping price gouging and recovering restitution. I'm glad that the Governor and the Attorney General were able to use their authority to protect Minnesotans, but I also take seriously the criticism that we here at the legislature should be doing the policymaking. So we've been undergoing a process here to take a hard look at what happened with Executive Order 2010. We talked to a lot of other committee members and a lot of stakeholders about what worked well and what could have been better. And in particular, we had long and extensive conversations with the Retailers Association about how we could put a price gouging bill into law that both protects Minnesota consumers and works for businesses. And I'm pleased to tell you that the retailers support the bill that's before you today. And it's also worth noting that most retailers, and in fact most businesses in Minnesota, would never do this. Most businesses in Minnesota are good citizens and good valued members of our community. But the fact that few people in Minnesota would price gouge doesn't mean that there shouldn't be accountability for those that do. This bill is about ensuring that accountability. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Backer moves to amend House File number 6, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A5.
The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would request a roll call vote, please.
Representative Backer requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands or so, there will be a roll call. Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would agree with the author. First of all, most Minnesotans, us business owners, are there to serve our customers. Though one of the challenges that we do not have any control over, all of us business owners could say, is that nasty little word that starts with an I, inflation. We have no control over that. When COVID hit as a business owner, there was prices that just went crazy, okay? I have a couple articles here. In 2021, lumber went up 37%, and that was because of supply and demand. There was less people working, so there was less product, but the demand was still there. We as business owners have no control over that. Another thing that I have here is the article that flour to make bread so we can eat, flour went up 24.9%, members. Then rent during 2021 from the Washington Post in places like Austin, New York, and Miami went up 30 to 40%. Us business owners who own property, rent, sell, lease, own, would not control out of those factors. And then the prices of eggs rose 70% from this article here from Business in 2021. So my amendment talks about, though, inflation caused by state and federal government. So how would that affect? Well, obviously during COVID, we had a monetary supply by the federal government that put tremendous amount of money into the economy. So guess what happens if you're the owner of a online ATV business, okay? A lot of people had kids at home, and a lot of people, mom and dad, want to get a reason for the kids to get out, and there was a huge demand, low supply. We didn't control that, and there was prices that went up 20, 30, 40% because of the demand and the lack of supply. How else could the state and federal government affect pricing? Well, we saw that with baby formula last year. There was a factory shut down, I believe that was in Michigan, maybe Ohio, but one of those states, that there was a low demand on baby formula. For moms and dads that have infant, that's something that's a priority. But still, when there's no supply and high demand, you're going to see price increases. Not gouging, it's just how it works when there's low supply. And then finally, in the state of Minnesota, we had an energy bill, our side likes to call it the blackout bill, that was signed into law that is going to increase, stakeholders have talked about increasing energy prices significantly. Well, when energy prices increase, people who manufacture, we manufacture a product in Browns Valley, and other business owners do too, we don't control electricity prices. So my amendment just says a price increase due to inflation caused by state and federal government actions. Because we as small business owners don't control what state and federal government does. So it just makes sense if it's something that deals with state or federal government, that us small business owners should not be affected by those price increases. And then we have to worry about government coming and saying, oh, you increase prices. So that is a concern, and that's why I added that amendment. Thank you, members.
Discussion on the Backer Amendment. Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would ask for a no vote on this amendment. The bill already has protections that make clear that an excessive price doesn't include prices that are raised due to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service, and that's not contingent upon who causes the price to go up. So I think that the way the bill deals with this problem is better than the way the amendment would deal with the problem, so I'd ask for a no vote.
Further discussion on the Backer Amendment. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Niska moves to amend House File Number 6, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A7.
I recognize the member from Anoka, the author of the amendment, Representative Niska, to explain the A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And Representative Stevenson, I appreciate a lot of where you're coming from on this bill. I appreciate the recognition that we as the legislature should be making the policy making, shouldn't be left to the governor in an emergency, and that the current emergency power statute is way too broad and needs to be reformed. I wish we would deal with that more comprehensively than trying to do that on an issue-by-issue basis. But I appreciate the recognition, finally, by this body that what the governor did by taking over lawmaking power in the emergency overstepped, and we as the legislature should reassert ourselves. I do also appreciate the fact that in extraordinary times, some potential bad actors might take advantage of that situation, but I don't think that this bill, as currently drafted, strikes the right balance. I think what it fails to really recognize is that in those extraordinary times, in the market disruptions we're talking about, when we're looking at essential goods and services, an even worse thing than too high prices for those essential goods and services are empty shelves for those essential goods and services. And that is something that all of us experienced way too often in the pandemic. And the fact of the matter is, a fact that I don't think that this bill as currently drafted appropriately recognizes is that during those periods of time, we all as consumers depend on extraordinary action by, frankly, heroic people, heroic businesses, the manufacturers, the people who work for the manufacturers, the wholesalers and the retailers, and all of the people that have to take extraordinary action to get all of the essential goods and services to the market. And as an attorney who sometimes advises people about how they should behave under certain legal regimes, the bill as currently drafted is going to send the message to all of those people, to all of those businesses, and to the people advising those businesses that in that time of extraordinary market disruption, maybe what they should do if they want to avoid legal liability is just to pull back and not provide those goods and services. And so the purpose of the A7 amendment, and I hope you'll accept this as a friendly amendment, is to add just a little bit more comfort to those folks that if the reason that the prices are going up, and if they can show the reason that those prices are going up is because they're trying to get goods and services to the market and prevent further market disruption, that would be a protection for them under the bill, just to give a little bit more protection to those good businesses. Like you said, Representative Stevenson, most would never price gouge. Most of them, I think, are trying to do the right thing. And this is to help those good businesses to make sure that they can feel safe, that what they're doing, the extraordinary work that they're doing to get goods and services to the market is going to be recognized and protected and not investigated and punished. So I urge members to support the A7 amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A7 amendment. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I add a no vote on this amendment. As I mentioned in the last amendment, I think that we already have a number of good controls in the bill to establish what price gouging is and what it isn't. I don't think that this amendment is superior to what's already in the bill. I think what this amendment allows for is price rationing, a situation where if you're wealthy, you have access to goods and services, and if you're poor, you're out of luck. And I don't think that that's the Minnesota we want. I also just want to take a moment and say that I disagree strongly with the idea that this bill as a whole is going to cause businesses to not operate in Minnesota during an emergency or not come to market. Or, there's the suggestion that perhaps a lawyer might give someone advice to not come to Minnesota because of this bill. I think that's demonstrably not true. 36 other states have price gouging protections, including states like Florida and Texas, and we don't see people not going to Florida and Texas during emergencies to provide goods and services. In fact, some of those states have tougher bills than this one and do just fine. Not to make myself look bad in front of my DFL colleagues over here, but Texas, for instance, allows much higher civil penalties than Minnesota, up to $250,000 a day. That's 10 times more. And now I've lost a lot of street cred with my caucus mates here, but that's just the price you pay for good policy, I guess. Vote no.
Any further discussion to the A7 amendment? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska, the author of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm disappointed, Representative Stevenson. I didn't ask for roll call before because I was hoping that this was something that was reasonable and you'd take it. But, Mr. Speaker, I do request a roll call.
Representative Niska requests a roll call vote. Seeing more than 15 hands, there will be a roll call vote. Is there any further discussion from you, Representative Niska?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yes, I would encourage members to vote for the amendment. Again, we don't want to threaten, we don't want to punish, we don't want to deter all of those good businesses that are doing the work that is necessary to try to get goods and services to market. The fact of the matter is, when there was an emergency executive order in place, there were a lot of good businesses that did get their reputation smeared, that did get investigations brought against them that turned out not to be meritorious. What Representative Stevenson calls price rationing is actually the law of supply and demand that is necessary in any market in order to get things to market. When prices go up, that is how more things get brought to the marketplace. And so the bill as it's currently written does not strike the right balance. If we're going to go down this road, if we are going to, like I said, assert our authority as a legislature in this area, which I think is a good thing for us to do, to say we as the legislature get to write policy, not the governor and the attorney general in an emergency. But if we're going to go down this road, this is an important protection, an important amendment to add to it to make sure that good businesses, the Main Street businesses that we recognize that their cashiers and their store staff did extraordinary work. Those businesses themselves did extraordinary work in order to bring the essential goods and services to market. Again, we're talking about essential goods and services. A vote no is for empty shelves. A vote yes is to make sure that those shelves do get stocked, that we're making sure that the businesses that do stock the shelves are protected. So please vote yes on the A7 amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A7 amendment. I recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Niska, for bringing this amendment. This is a good amendment, and I hope that we all can agree on this and vote green today. From a business perspective, obviously in economics, we have supply, we have demand, and in something like Representative Stevenson had brought up the toilet paper shortage, so I'm just going to use that as an example because he brought that up. In a manufacturing facility, we can only produce things at a certain rate. So let's just take, this is different, but if you're baking a pizza, it's going to take 15 minutes to bake that, and you can move 4 pizzas through your oven in 1 hour. So I think we can all visually see that. So in this case, when something that was fundamentally necessary to have, like toilet paper, we could not create it or make it fast enough to replenish the supply. Now, I want to give you another example. I have a friend that works at a daycare. They would have to shut down their doors or their business if they did not have the toilet paper for the daycare because that would not be up to code. So this is a business example that as a business, they may have needed to pay more for the toilet paper to get the toilet paper to stay open and to be productive. So this really is just a business 101, and I think we all can agree that we should allow the market to work, and in this case, specifically, when we have essential items that are needed, when government is getting in the way and saying that they know better, what could potentially happen is unintended consequences. There could be withdrawal. People are afraid to sell a product that is needed. And so I do ask you to vote and support Representative Niska's amendment.
Any further discussion to the A7 amendment? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the A7 amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 70 nays, the motion does not prevail and the amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 6.
Third reading. Member discussion to House File 6. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I was impressed today by Representative Stevenson. He was presenting his bill, HF 100, in public safety. And as I said there, Representative, you have a disposition and a way of approaching this process that seems very collaborative and open to discussion, even as you have a clear vision of what it is that you want to accomplish. And I very much appreciate that. As we look at what this bill attempts to do, what the stated and implied intention of it is, I think it's well motivated. What I see this as trying to prevent is people who are in need because of what we're calling in the language an abnormal market disruption. It's fancy legislative language for a crisis, a disaster, an emergency. Circumstances where people are contending with uncertainty and fear. And in those circumstances, what this bill imagines or forecasts is a scenario where an essential good or service, food, fuel, healthcare supplies, whatever the case may be, is offered to them at a price that, again, referencing the language in the bill, is unconscionably excessive, which is an interesting subjective judgment, unconscionably excessive. And what we're trying to prevent is someone having to endure, having to bear that cost. So, random example, paying $200 for a gallon of water. We don't think that should ever happen. Okay. Well, it won't. It won't happen under this bill. But what also won't happen is that gallon of water won't be available to purchase at any price because it won't be brought to market. Because what price does, the function that it serves, is to communicate to both producers and consumers how they ought to act, how they ought to engage with one another, how they ought to engage with products and services. In that hypothetical situation where somebody's charging $200 for a gallon of water, which, I don't know that that's ever happened, but let's say it does. The reason they're doing so is not because they're unconscionable, it's not because they're a monster, it's not because they're obscene or excessive. They're doing so because that's the price that the product commands. And you know what commands that price? Why? Because somebody's willing to pay it. If they weren't willing to pay it, then the price would have to be lowered. That's how price works. And so what we're actually doing here with this bill, and it was referenced by Representative Niska in his presentation of his amendment, what we're actually doing is we're preventing the market from working the way that it naturally functions. And I understand, Representative Stevenson, you cited other states where similar or even potentially more restrictive legislation has been enacted and offered the claim that everything's fine there, they still get products and services in the event that there's an abnormal market disruption, a crisis, an emergency. Well, we don't know what they're not getting. That's one of the problems with interfering in the economic process, interfering in price, placing noise in the signal of what price communicates, is that you don't know what you don't know. You can't see what you can't see. You don't know how much more might have been made available if price was able to function properly. But I think, more fundamentally than that, well, before I go there, let me just say this. I think what we've witnessed here tonight on the House floor in discussion of this bill and the proposed amendments demonstrates the lack of functionality of this legislation. So in answer to both of the proposed amendments tonight, Representative Stevenson, the author, has stated that this bill already meets the goals intended by those amendments. Well, Harry Niska, in my judgment, is a pretty smart guy. All of our members, relatively smart people. The fact that we looked at this and didn't see what you see, which is an objective met by the language that's already there, stands as testament to the notion that this is a confusing piece of legislation. I mean, you look at the exceptions that are listed here. None of the following is considered an unconscionably excessive price. 1, a price that is substantially related to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service. Fantastic, wonderful, reasonable. But how do I know that that's true or not? How do I assess that? A more interesting question than how do I assess that is who assesses that? Because this bill gives inordinate power to 2 people, and 2 people only, 2 individuals. It gives supreme power, more power, to the governor of the state of Minnesota, who already, we've had demonstrated to us in recent years, has the capacity to unilaterally cancel democracy, tell us that we all get to live in our homes, we don't get to open our businesses, we can't send our kids to school. He just gets to decide that, one guy. And we accepted it. We went along with it. Now we're saying that on top of that, while he's got us in his peacetime emergency, he can also decide that we can't buy and sell according to our own judgment. We can't set our own prices for our own products. We're going to give him that power. We're also going to empower another member of the executive branch, the Attorney General. And he's the answer to my previous question. Who gets to decide whether or not a price is substantially related to an increase in the cost of manufacturing, obtaining, replacing, providing, or selling a good or service? Well, the AG does. He gets to decide by virtue of whether or not he comes after you, whether or not he pursues an action, whether or not he pursues $1,000 per transaction up to $25,000 per day. I had to double check that to make sure it was right. Per day, $25,000 per day. Wow. So, I'll end here, which is the moral premise of all of this. And I know this is definitely an idea that is not shared broadly, certainly not across party lines, but I hold it to be nonetheless true and accurate. You don't have the moral right to tell somebody what price their product or service can command in the market. You don't have that right. And the reason why you don't have that right is because you don't own that person. They don't belong to you. Their time doesn't belong to you. Their labor doesn't belong to you. The fruit of their labor doesn't belong to you. You don't get to command the terms on which they transact their time, their labor, their effort, their mind, their selves, their person. That's up to them. It's not up to you. So on top of a piece of legislation that doesn't work, doesn't function, can't be understood by smart people in this room, not even sure whether or not an amendment affects a particular end or not, can't tell by looking at plain language what it actually accomplishes, what it actually achieves. This is going to create, not only is it going to create confusion, not only is it going to create more fear and uncertainty during times where people are already operating under fear and uncertainty. We're going to pile more on top of it. The cherry on top of all of that is that it's fundamentally immoral to tell somebody that they cannot offer, not force. Nobody's saying you have to give me $200 for this gallon of water, but to offer. Hey, I drove this up here from Texas. I drove this here from California. It cost me a lot to get it here, but because I did that, it's here and it's available to you for the low, low price of whatever. You're telling somebody that they can't do that, and that is not a right that you have. Not as an individual, and not collectively. There isn't a number of people, there isn't an election certificate, there isn't a moral right that exists that gives you the ability, rightfully and morally, to tell somebody what price they can offer for the fruit of their labor. Please vote no.
Further discussion to the bill. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Frankly, I wish we had a better section on ag. Even without this bill, there have been actions against poultry farmers because the price of eggs skyrocketed. Well, if you knew it was because of a disease was killing millions and millions of poultry. And there were suddenly shortages. Now, I suppose we could say you can't raise the price, but if we artificially had it low, someone would come in and ship it off to another state where they'd make big bucks. You'd add another middleman or middle person. And frankly, the intent of the bill is great. But if we already have problems where attorney generals go after farmers because of a spot issue out of their control, I think we should have looked better and harder on this bill. Try hard and try better next time. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, the author of the bill, Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for the discussion today. I think this is a good bill to solve a problem that we potentially have when we get into an emergency, which is, are we going to allow a very small group of people to enrich themselves off the misery of others? We should not do that. It's not right. This bill allows us to have tools to prevent that from happening and to get recourse for victims when it does. It's pretty straightforward in that respect, so I'll ask for a green vote.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 6. The clerk will close the roll. There being 72 ayes and 59 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.